Okay, I am going to touch base regarding a handful of different things. All I'm really doing, to be honest, is just recording my desktop. I use OBS, which looks confusing, but it's what I use. Anyways, what we've got going on is an interesting discussion as to where the last name Bell come from. Um, as many of you are probably aware, we are predominantly what you would call Western European. You could say Britain, the British Isles, also the very north of France. The oldest that we actually have for the name Bell actually appears during the time period of William the Conqueror. At the Battle of Hastings, there was a Bell who appeared as a leader or some type of figurehead within the command of the archers, if I remember correctly, on the side of um, the English during that. Now, it was, of course, William the Conqueror who won. And the interesting thing is that William the Conqueror, there, whenever I was doing research back into our family history, there is some ties possibly into William the Conqueror, and it's kind of a shared name that kind of pops up in both our family line and as associates of his. So I don't know if there's necessarily is there a definite connection, but it's just something of interest, and there's no way to ever really verify it. But the thing about whenever you look into old names, you have to go back. You look at your ancestry. People who appear in your ancestry appear there for a reason. And whenever the further back you go, and in fact, our family tree, we're actually very lucky to be able to go back as far as we can go. I don't actually have a copy of our family tree right now. I know that's out there, but I'm not currently up with it. Anyways, the name Bell has a couple different spellings. Bell, of course, just being the regular everyday spelling. Also, there's Behl, which is more of a Germanic spelling. And there's also, this one might be a little shocking, Beall, Beal. Now, this one is a little different, but we actually have a common tie to them. And the reason why is because of the way that the name actually comes. The Behl is more Germanic. We are not German. We do have a little bit of what they call the Flemish in us, which the Flemish are this area of Europe. Now, if you look, this is the northern coast. The German, the Behl would definitely come more from the Germans. But over here on this little coast, and in fact, most people we're going to be talking about for a little bit lived right in this area. In fact, let me Google it real quick. Saint Omer. If you look into the Saint Omer people, I'm just going to pull up on the map to kind of give you an idea. Saint Omer is kind of in the Calais area. And what you find, oh wow, there's Dunkirk. So to kind of give you an idea, this is Saint Omer here. Calais right up here on the coast, Dunkirk, and you have literally just right across the channel here. And we're also going to be talking a little bit of time up in this area. King's Lynn is important. Norwich. This area is also important to our family. But anyways, the bell. In French, bell means beautiful. Anywhere else, bell means bell. At least in English, you know, a bell that you would ring. Now, what's interesting is this is French. So where does the bell name come from? Well, if you go back, the bell name doesn't actually appear up until the time period of Queen Elizabeth. Which time period Queen Elizabeth? In fact, the name it appears under is Sir Robert Bell, Speaker of the House of Commons under Queen Elizabeth, which is in the 1500s. Like I said earlier, the last name does appear earlier than that at the Battle of Hastings, but actually it was a recorded part of our ancestry. It doesn't appear until Sir Robert Bell. Now, what's interesting about Sir Robert Bell is that he was a Speaker of the House of Commons, and he married a Dorothy Beaupre. Dorothy Beaupre was Baroness Beaupre, and in fact, she lived at a place called Beaupre Hall. Maybe Beaupre. French, of course. Beaupre Hall. It was in this area, Norfolk, England. It's King's Lynn area, and it was in fact an old, what you would consider a country estate in that time period, and that was her family's estate. What's interesting about it is that she married Sir Robert Bell. Sir Robert Bell was actually tutored by Lord Broglie, which is the same tutor for Queen Elizabeth. Now, Queen Elizabeth, if you're not familiar with who that is, Queen Elizabeth is this lady, and she is basically the one that they look back as the golden era of the British Isles in a lot of ways. So, anyways, Sir Robert Bell was the Speaker of the House of Commons under Queen Elizabeth. He married into the Beaupres, which of course Dorothy Beaupre, this whole household. But here's the interesting thing: we've got a heraldry here. You see that the Beaupre or the Bell line doesn't come in until later, and there's a number of different lines up here that all kind of intersect. Now, the way heraldry works, I just want to point this out. You look very, very closely at this cross, and look very closely at this cross. This one has these little, I don't know what they're called, doves or what have you, and this one, of course, just has triangles or squares, cubes. But then you look at this one, it has got this here and here, and this one is there. What happens is whenever families intersected, and if they actually had a heraldry, that heraldry would intersect. And so then you can take and look down here. Now these three panes are all Beaupre. These here we'll get to in a bit, and I'm not 100% sure. Even on my best days, I can't tell you all of this. I don't know it that well. But these here are definitely, I know, Beaupre. And if you look, you have this one is the same basically as this. And you find there's that one again, but it's even more reduced. And you find it gets very, very hard and difficult to see. But basically, every time there's an in marriage and they begin to combine these, like for instance, this here is a half. Here it's a half. Here it's a quarter. Okay. And is this possibly the same? It looks like it is. These two are the same. But here you see this one, it's now a quarter of a quarter, something like that effect. And so you keep adding these in. Eventually, though, that line ends, and then in comes the Bells, because the Beaupres essentially, I don't want to say died out, but in a way that's kind of what happened. So the heraldry gives you an idea, but the last name Bell begins to pop up, and what you find though is that if this is the Beaupre, then who are these? Because here's the thing you have to realize about heraldry. If a person's name was recorded historically during this time period, because the Beaupres are pre-1500 AD, and going further back, we're going to go to about 1100 AD. What that means is there was a reason why their name was recorded, because not everyone's name was recorded back then, and more importantly, not everyone back then even had a last name for that matter. You know, it could have been John the son of William, William's son, something to that effect. So if you eventually go back, you find Dorothy Beaupre, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information how I do research. If I type in Dorothy Beaupre ancestry, I've already looked it up before, Dorothy Beaupre ancestry, you can find a handful of different records and things like that. I don't have ancestry.com. I've not clicked on this one before. We'll just click on it. You can then go in here and you'll find Dorothy Beaupre, Dorothy Beaupre Bell. She is the daughter of Edward Beaupre and Catherine Bedingfield. Now, Bedingfield is a name I've seen in English history, but off the top of my head, I've not traced it down. But I do know that there is an important name with that. She was married to Robert Bell III, and they were married 15th October 1559 in Norfolk, England. She's the mother of, and it has a number here. Now, our particular line is Edmund Bell. Edmund Bell is the oldest of Sir Robert Bell's sons, so he is what you would consider the patriarch of the next generation. He is like the lead son. He is the one who would have inherited the most. Now, what's interesting is Sir Robert Bell was Speaker of the House of Commons under Queen Elizabeth, and during this time period, if you remember, his first son Edmund right here was actually during the time period also the Spanish Armada. Spanish Armada sailed against England to basically destroy it from a military standpoint. Sir Edmund Bell, if you go to his Wikipedia, Edmund Bell, one of the interesting things about him is that he was involved in what the Spanish would call was privateering, or actually the Spanish would just call it a pirate. But he was involved in privateering. I'll just read this. By 1583 it is known that he received his patrimony, which included extensive properties throughout Norfolk and manor of Castle Acre, where Edmund dwelled and duly made his family seat. Perhaps this event is timed with his first marriage to Anne Osborne. By 1586 he became MP for Aldelburg, where he was active in mercantile affairs, investing heavily in privateering. A privateer is an individual who's working on behalf of a government and has a legal right essentially to be a legal pirate. So in other words, we have a little bit of shadiness in our ancestry there. But privateer to one people is a pirate to another, which this is actually part of the reason why the Spanish were attacking the English during that time period. So anyways, the building of ships. Now he wasn't specifically a pirate, but he was involved in the building of ships, specifically gunboats. That incorporated advances in naval architecture. These investments did not prove lucrative, however, perhaps were forfeited in part a consequence of the Spanish invasion. This is all tied together. So if you ever get a chance to watch anything about Queen Elizabeth that talks about the invasion, this is part of it. Bell's naval assets may have been sacrificed in service to the crown. Following this period, he found tenaciously engaged as one of the commissioners entrusted with draining the Fens, which eventually proved successful. I'm not even sure what that means. He was knighted by King James I on Friday the 13th, May 1603, together with 10 others, including William Dethick Garter, King of Arms. So anyways, he married, and this is our direct ancestor, Edmund Bell married Anne Osborne, daughter of Peter Osborne. Now the interesting thing, that means we're obviously an ancestor of them, but also of the Osbornes if you go back, 500-600 years back. Peter Osborne would have been his father-in-law, and he was a keeper of the privy purse of King Edward VI. So our ancestry is very much a part of the history of England, but more than that. If we go backward in time, and we look into who Dorothy Beaupre was. Dorothy Beaupre was the daughter of Edward Beaupre. Edward Beaupre was the son of Nicholas Beaupre, obviously, and Nicholas Beaupre was a son of Thomas Beaupre. Eventually, what you find when you go back far enough, and I don't remember exactly how far, let's see here, maybe I can get lucky and find it. That name Mountfort, that's the name I was mentioning earlier, that there are people in common with that last name in our ancestry and also directly connected to William the Conqueror. And there it is, Christian St. Omer. Christian St. Omer, whenever you begin to get back, this is in 1272, okay? This is very, very ancient. She was daughter of Thomas de St. Omer. The St. Omers are also known as the Falkenbergs. Now what's interesting is if you look at William St. Omer and Nicholas St. Omer, and then eventually William St. Omer again, and William St. Omer, and I'm not sure if that's Galim, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Yeah, I'm not sure how those names are pronounced. William, Galim, William, okay, weird. There's a reason I'm clicking on all this. Huh. Interesting. This goes back pretty far. But anyways, what you find is that the Pass of Calais in France remember we were pointing out the St. Omers. The St. Omers are of an interesting family. There's a reason why these people are recorded. Um, Now, if you look, Godfrey de St. Omer, also known as Godfroy, he's also known as Godfrey Falkenberg, was a Flemish knight. Remember where the Flemish are, right up in this area. Pass of Calais is right here, so this is all connected. He is a Flemish knight and one of the founding members of the Knights Templar. That's huge historically. Our ancestors are in fact Templars. We are descendants of Templars. Our family, the St. Omer line, is in fact part of the Templar line. In fact, the one of them, Hugh of Falkenberg, also known as Hugh of St. Omer, if I remember correctly, I came across his line as being a direct descendant of us, but I cannot remember for certain. I can't remember if it was Hugh or if it was his brother, because there was a handful. There was basically 12 people who founded the Knights Templar, and 2 of them were St. Omers. And obviously a number of them had gone on the crusade itself. This is what the Knights Templar were. They were crusaders, crusader knights. And so what's interesting about that is that this is the death of Hugh. He actually was the Prince of Galilee. He reigned from 1101 till he died in 1106. And he basically also built a castle there, the fortress at Tyrone is what it's called. And there are not much of a remnant left of it. It's little more than rubble up on a hilltop, and it gave a nice commanding view of the valley below, as you can see here. But what's interesting is that Hugh and the whole of the St. Omer line, basically what happens is the St. Omers eventually marry into the Beaupre eventually marry into the Bell line, which is where we get the Bell today that we are, which comes through Sir Robert Bell, then Edmund Bell, and I do not remember which of his sons passed that. It might be Sir Robert Bell, basically the second or third or what have you. Now also, they're also ancestors of the House of Windsor. I know that they're connected to the Queen of Elizabeth, who is also obviously of the House of Windsor. But that's a whole other thing to discuss another time. I'm really rambling on. What I want to get back to is Edmund Bell. All these people, they are of French ancestry because they were basically connected to the St. Omers and such. The thing is why do we believe that they are Scottish? I can answer that because of this. Godfrey of St. Omer, Templar. Hugh, Templar. These are our ancestors. This is our ancestors' family. Now, which one off the top of my head we are directly ancested from, I don't really know, and sometimes the spellings get messed up, what have you. But what I do know is we are of the line of St. Omer. Knights Templar in the year 1307, in fact it was on Friday the 13th, I believe in April of Friday the 13th, calamity fell. And this is in fact why they claim Friday the 13th as being a day of misfortune. I'm going to just read this section from the Knights Templar Wikipedia. The Templars were closely tied to the Crusades. When the Holy Land was lost, support for the order faded. Rumors about the Templars' secret initiation ceremony created distrust, and King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, took advantage of the situation to gain control over them. In 1307, he had many of the order's members in France arrested, tortured into giving false confessions, and burned at the stake. Pope Clement V disbanded the order in 1312 under pressure. So basically, King Philip IV of France pulled an absolute just wicked move, said, hey, I'm in debt to these guys. Instead of paying them back, I'll get them essentially disbanded. And that's what he did. He bribed the Pope, and it happened. In fact, the funny thing is, about 5-10 years ago, the Pope previous to the current Pope actually went back and rescinded this condemnation of them. And what's amazing and what happened was many Templars began to flee. Here we are, if you think about it, our ancestors were in the north of France. By the 1300s, though, most of them are already in England because of reasons, or if they hadn't been to England, they were not far from it, as because they were there in Calais. Well, if the King of France is basically persecuting you, where do you go? England's a good choice because they are natural historical enemies. So what happens is they begin to go north. And eventually they actually go so far north they run into this guy by the name of Robert the Bruce. Now Robert the Bruce actually makes an appearance in the movie Braveheart. And there are many legends about Robert the Bruce having help. In fact, this is the character in the Braveheart movie, having help from Templars to help defeat the English crown to help free Scotland. So how do we get the bells tied to Scotland? Well, what happens is they go north and basically just keep going to get away from the French persecution of the Templars. And eventually what happens is they settle into what is eventually one day known as kind of the borderlands between England and Scotland, and they become a clan there. That's where you get Clan Bell. Now what happened is, from my research, and this is important to note, it's almost all research I've done, but it's also a lot of me mixing in my personal thought as to how it happened. And what happens is basically I came across a story that there were two Bell boys. One went into the church and one went into politics. The one who went into politics eventually leads to the line that becomes Sir Robert Bell and our direct ancestors. The other boy led into the Bells that are more from the north, but also eventually would probably come over more so as pilgrims. And at one point in time, whenever we get to the New World, as many as maybe even more than 1 in 3 people in the New World are actually Bells. It's amazing because what you see happening, and this is important to note, you know, our family was very, very, I don't want to say didn't have a tendency, but they definitely had a desire to expand and to move, to go to better pastures. And what I mean by better pastures is this. Sir Robert Bell. If I go back to Sir Robert Bell, Speaker of the House of Commons, he actually angered Queen Elizabeth because he continued to ask for Queen Elizabeth to declare a successor to her throne. And in fact, it says right here under his career section on his Wikipedia, additionally, it would appear that Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth, witnessed this maverick style behavior as on 19th of October 1566, Bell did argue very boldly pursue the succession question. She never left a successor because she feared that as soon as she did, that person would basically offer. And he can pursue this in the face of the Queen's command to leave it alone. That's amazing. One of our ancestors basically questioned the Queen. But what happened was this: Mr. Bell, our ancestor, saw something coming. He saw that if she doesn't declare somebody to take over for her after she's gone, the nation would fall into civil war. And in fact, after the Queen's death, I believe within 50 years, the nation was ripped by civil war. But Mr. Bell saw this coming, and guess what they did? The Bells poured their wealth into going across the sea. The Bell family basically en masse moved to a place over in Virginia. In fact, if you look, the ancestors that we have were very much a part of the Virginia Company. The Virginia Company, if you're familiar with the if I could ever type, the Virginia Company was actually a part of the goal of establishing a colony in the New World. The Virginia Company was actually a part of a venture that they were involved in. What's amazing is basically they packed everybody up and started moving them over here. and it resulted in the colonies being filled very, very quickly. Now, the amazing thing is that they did that basically to avoid war. They saw war coming to New England. They saw war getting ready to take place over there. And you'll notice about the Bells, they had a tendency to try to outrun bad things. They saw bad things coming down the pike and they liked to outrun them. And in their time period, they could, because they had the ability, they had the power, the authority to be able to commission themselves to move further west. Now, to answer the question is, why is it Belle as in beautiful? Well, it's because it's French. And if you look at where our ancestors come from and the ties that they had, I do entirely believe that it's mostly actually a French word. In fact, very far into England, Norfolk isn't even that far in to the United Kingdom. Let's click on a map here. This is the I guess you'd call a state. I'm not sure of where Norfolk is. King's Lynn is where Sir Robert Bell actually served, I believe, as like a judge, if I remember correctly. Now, I want you to look at this. Norfolk is what this region is called. And whenever you go across the ocean, you remember this this is like where you consider Flanders. This is the Pass of Calais. This is St. Omer, would be somewhere in this area. Let me see if I can find it. It should be somewhere in this area. I remember it's somewhere in this green. But anyways, it's in this general area. Yeah, I'm just not having much luck finding it. But anyways, let's zoom out for a moment. So, the United Kingdom. Let's come across the United States here and begin to zoom in. We're going to zoom in on Virginia, where they started the Virginia Company, which is actually named for Queen Elizabeth, who was the Virgin Queen. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Guess what we find? Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk, UK. Over here somewhere over here. Yeah, Norfolk, Norwich. This region is called Norfolk, if I remember correctly. And you come across, and lo and behold, you find Norfolk, Virginia. And what you find is you actually see a lot of these old towns all through this area are actually English, what we would consider almost Old English style names. Yorktown, York being a very, very well-known city over there. Jamestown, Williamsburg, Charles City. Charles is probably named after King Charles. Gloucester. These are all very what we would consider English names. But here's what happens next. You got Norfolk, Suffolk. Our ancestors, liked to stay ahead of everyone. They liked to keep moving. And that's exactly what they did. They actually began to move across through the Virginias and then eventually wind up in the Tennessee and Kentucky area. I don't remember exactly where at, but they're over in this area. The whole Bell Witch thing still creeps me out. But anyways, they eventually wind up over here and eventually begin to move into Illinois. Now, that's kind of a quick, I don't even want to say it's quick, it's kind of more rambly, a little bit of ancestry. But we even have an ancestor that wound up being the governor here on Bermuda. Not a direct ancestor, but like an uncle or something to that effect. And what's amazing is the majority of our ancestors, as soon as they hit the New World, became farmers, they were lawyers, they were politicians, they were a number of different things. But they eventually pushed further and further west and wind up, many of them, in Illinois. Some actually pushed on to Texas and California. But most of the ones that we are directly from wind up here. Now what happens is, by the time of the Revolutionary War, most of our ancestors are way out here. Revolutionary War was in the 1700s. Most of our ancestors were already over here. Most of the Revolutionary War, of course, took place over here. By the time of the Civil War, we actually have got a direct ancestor who fought for the Union and actually died. I want to say Fort Campbell sounds right. So somewhere in this area during the Civil War, he fought for the Union. Now, if I remember correctly, he only died in camp because there was a terrible sickness that broke out in camp, killed a number of people. It was an epidemic. But that's how we eventually get over here. But to answer where our name comes from, if you see, most of our ancestors are tied to this area. So I believe wholeheartedly it is in fact a French name. And you look where we wind up, not that far. Now we had some that do wind up further north, and this is where you get that bell, as northern bell. But those good old southern bells, they're definitely a little more southern, I guess you could say. But anyways, this is getting to where I'm starting to kind of ramble. And I wish, to be honest, I wish that I had an access to the actual full family tree, because a lot of this stuff I've looked into and it's all very interesting. The things that I love the most about it, our ancestry, is that whenever you look, we have ancestors who, and indirect ancestors, who literally fought in the Middle East to liberate Jerusalem. We have an ancestor who died not far from this area, I want to say. We also have an ancestor who fought against Saladin, was actually held captive by Saladin. And then we have ancestors who, whenever you come back over this way, began to help establish the United Kingdom as a global power in the 15, 16, 1700s. And then we also have got ancestors who helped to push Western expansion into the United States. And the ancestry we have, it's amazing. It's something that not everybody can go back and look that far. So that's something that we really need to treasure and pass on as best we can. Now, like I said, I wish I had access to that, and I know there are family members who know way much more than I do. But anyways, I think that kind of sums this up. Yeah.